Hello everyone and welcome back to another deck tech for an EDH deck. Today we have another fantastic deck featuring another fantastic general in the form of Nekusar the Mindrazer. Nekusar is a 2/4 legendary creature for 2, a blue, a black, and a red. He is a zombie wizard that has at the beginning of each player's draw step, that player draws an additional card, and whenever an opponent draws a card, Nekusar deals 1 damage to that player. Considering Nekusar has both the triggered abilities of a Howling Mine and an enchantment that deals residual damage whenever your opponents draw cards, we want to make best use of these abilities. We want to use these abilities to our maximum potential by going all out and using similar cards that go hand in hand and work in synergy with the card itself. Nekusar is a fun deck to play if you like to draw lots of cards and like to make your opponents draw lots of cards as well. One word of warning though is that even though Nekusar may give off the illusion that your opponent is getting a lot more cards, it will do a lot of damage. Because of this, EDH players who have played against Nekusar usually are fairly aware of what he can do. That being said, you're likely going to have a target on your head due to the amount of damage you could potentially deal. There are several versions of Nekusar decks, but mine is more of a casual build. It does have the potential of winning games though, as it does have a lot of great cards that work well in synergy with Nekusar himself. However, based on your meta and what decks you face, you may want to adjust it accordingly to what your opponents are playing. Let's dive into the deck. We'll start out with the mana rocks like we usually do. There are really not that many in this deck. We do run a lot of lands though, but we do need a couple of mana rocks just to get that little extra boost. Starting off with Soul Ring, which is Soul Ring, I don't really have to explain much there. Again, we wanted Thought Vessel in this deck. You could also run Reliquary Tower, but I think I'm just really liking Thought Vessel. I think I've been explained that before in some of my other deck techs. Dimmer's Signet, just a nice extra mana rock which provides our 2 most important colors. Darksteel Ingot, I'm a big fan of Darksteel Ingot, as it lives through Shatterstorms and other things that could potentially destroy artifacts. And of course our handy dandy Gilded Lotus, which gives us a nice mana boost. Although we don't play green, we really do need quite a bit of mana to power some of the most important spells in the deck, and Gilded Lotus really helps us get there. Next up, we have the Howling Mine cards, which are essentially just give everyone extra cards and pretend like you're actually helping people out. When these cards appear to help out your opponents, but because you play Nekusar, the reality of the matter is that you're really hitting your opponents over the head with a shovel. Starting out with what else? Howling Mine. Envelope Guardian, which is kind of like a Howling Mine, but instead it gives everyone a no maximum hand size clause, and you have to discard the card, or one of the cards in your hand after you make the draw. Cameo of the Crescent Moon, just Howling Mine on a creature. Fevered Visions is just an additional Howling Mine for everyone. It does trigger at a different spot in the turn, but it's still nice and it can give you a little extra damage. Jace Valerian, Howling Mine Planeswalker-like, except it does make everyone draw at the same time, which is fine. Dictative Crucifix is just Howling Mine, except it's an enchantment with flash. Temple Bell is just Howling Mine, except you can choose whenever players draw the card. The Fury's Puzzle Box is essentially the equivalent of playing Twister with one leg. Just absolutely nuts. For this deck, you're going to get so many residual pain triggers from Nekusar and your other cards that do damage whenever your opponents draw cards. It really makes the game kind of a headache for your opponent, as they never really keep the same hand for more than one turn. Font of Mythos is just 2 Howling Mines. For a bit of a mix-up, I'm trying Omnixilus as kind of a one-sided Howling Mine, and that emblem is just juicy. Will of Ideas is just a really bonkers Howling Mine that gives you card advantage upon entering the battlefield. Gives you additional advantage per turn, while your opponents just have a regular Howling Mine. This card's actually quite nuts. It does seem kind of expensive for what it does, but it really does generate so much advantage. Next up are the cards that are very similar to Nekusar's second ability, which is whenever your opponent draws a card, they take some damage. Leading off these cards is the classic Underworld Dreams. We do need 3 blacks for this, so it can sometimes be a little bit tricky to play early in the game, but late game you usually should have no issues casting it. Fate Unraveler is essentially Underworld Dreams on an enchantment creature, which is nice. We don't have that many creatures, so having a creature to block or prevent your opponent from attacking into you really does help. Playful Visions is essentially kind of Nekusar without the creature. It's basically another additional Howling Mine, but at the same time it deals damage to any player whenever they draw a card. That's the only other real difference, is it's any player, not just opponents. Psychosis Crawler is a nice big creature. It usually is fairly big, considering we usually have quite a few cards in our hand, considering we have so many Howling Mines and card draw effects. You do have to keep in mind it is only when you draw cards, but considering we have just as many ways to draw cards as we make our opponent draw cards, usually that triggers fairly often. One thing to keep in mind is that even though there'll be some cards in this deck that do make you discard your hand, the Psychosis Crawler will still live through it because it doesn't check state-based actions until a spell has resolved. So you'll be fine on that. Don't worry about using things like Windfall and such. Phyrexian Tyranny is just the big boss of the residual pain effects. Really makes your opponents and even you make some really crazy decisions, either taxing yourself with mana or life. Since there are a lot of cards in this deck that make our opponent discard cards, Megrim is pretty sweet. I don't run it, but if you have it, you can also run Lily Honest Caress. That's also a pretty sweet card in a similar vein, or you can run both. Cataract Parasite is kind of a wacky other residual damage creature. It's very weak, so it won't likely trade with your opponent's general if it's trying to kill you with general damage. But the other thing about it is it's usually, it does need a red permanent to get the damage going. So it works really well when you have Nekusar or Spiteful Visions out. Lastly, we have probably my favorite residual killer, or damage over time killer. It is the Bloodchief's Ascension. Considering all these cards I showed before will usually have some way to damage your opponent via card draw, and everyone on the field will be trying to attack each other. Usually this will get counters incredibly quickly, and at that point, usually the game just goes in your favor as you'll just gain so much life. Next up, we have our Windmillers. These are the cards that will basically allow all players to discard their hand and draw a bunch of cards. And we have quite a lot of them because it's a very important effect, considering it's essentially how we win the game with Nekusar and all the other cards that do similar things. First up, we have Jace's Archivist, which is just a windmill on a creature. It's an activated ability, though. Next, we have the classic Windfall, which is each player discards their hand and draws cards equal to the player who discarded the most cards this way. Mullen Psyche, which just racks up insane amount of damage if we can chain together several windmills in a turn, but keep in mind you do have to have Metalcraft to use it at its maximum effect. Collective Defiance, just because there may be the creature we may want to kill, and we may just want to windmill ourselves, or windmill a particular player. Whispering Madness, which is a windmill you can use over and over if you have a creature on the battlefield and a way to get through. Speaking of which, you can attach it to Forgotten Creation, which has Skulk, so if your opponent has either no creatures or very big creatures, you can get through and use it again and again. Also, we can use its ability if we don't like our hand. Wheel and Deal, this is one wacky card that makes as many of our opponents want to windmill, and then we get one card. This is completely wacky, and this is probably the only deck this is really playable in. Incendiary Command, just a versatile card that can allow us to windmill or just have another nice effects. Reforge the Soul, we rarely miracle this, it's just mainly there for an additional windmill. It's nice though. Memory Jar is just absolutely bonkers in this deck because we do run the Academy Ruins, so there are times where we can use at least 2 or 3 memory jars in a turn. It's pretty broken. I get puns. Haha, broken. Forced Fruition, which is just another really goofy, comical card that is this is probably one of the only EDH decks it's playable in, but it's really, really nuts. Just great if you can get it to stick, and it just really makes your opponents be a little more cautious. Usually it does get like disenchanted or removed pretty quickly, but the good news is that it's whenever your opponent plays a spell, so even if they try to get rid of it, you'll still get some value out of it. And finally, we have the classic Time Spiral, which is just the wonderful reset the game effect, kind of like Time Twister. I, of course, don't have a Time Twister, but yeah, Time Spiral is still a really great card for this deck, and you get to keep going if you need to. Since you untap your lands, you can cast more windmills if you want. Considering Nekusar will likely have some targets on his head, we have to run a few counter spells. First up is Muddle the Mixture, which is likely going to be countering anything that's going to kill Nekusar, and you can transmute it for a Howling Mine. Arcane Denial, because we like having hard counters, and even though it will give our opponent some cards, we don't really care because we want our opponent to draw some cards. It deals more damage to them. Classic Counterspell, to just counter anything we want. Forbid, which counters everything we want, but we can buy it back by discarding some cards. Mystic Confluence, which allows us to counter spells, bounce creatures, and draw cards. This is nifty because we may want to draw some cards and trigger some residual triggers there to do some damage. And finally, I have my big bulky assertion, which is actually a lot of fun. It may not seem like it's super synergistic, but it's nice because we can take something that we really like a big mana rock, or a nice juicy creature. Next up, we have kind of the nice support cards. Then the Pain Artist is a nice early drop that we can play and kill some early creatures that could pose a threat. Also gives our opponent some cards, or we can draw some cards by damaging our own creatures. Archaeomancer is just nice when you want to recall a windmill that you used, or something even more special. Metamorph is just a nice clone that's there to copy our mana rocks if need be, or copy our opponent's mana rocks, or our opponent's creatures, or our creatures. And finally, Prosperity, which just gives everyone extra cards. Although I usually like to use this early game to just get some extra advantage, or give everyone some extra cards. It's just a nice card overall considering how many residual pain cards we run. Up next, we run our tutor package of the classic Demonic Tuner, Liliana Vess, which is a tutor on our Planeswalker, Increasing Ambition, which gives us a tutor and gives us advantage upon flashing back, and Mystical Tutor, which allows us to tutor for windfalls and other fun things. We also have a bit of a removal package. I'm actually running Spine of Ishsaw because it's the only thing I can really think of in my colors that truly gets rid of an enchantment. Decree of Pain, just because I love Decree of Pain. I love drawing cards from destroying all these creatures. And Life's Finale, just because there's going to be some decks where I don't want to see any creatures, and having a nice board wipe like that is, well, stellar. You could, of course, run Damnation, but because Wizards will never reprint it, they're just a real pain in the butt to find. Like a lot of my decks that run a lot of stuff that discards cards, I run one Eldrazi Titan. It can be Ulamog or Kozilek, but it's really up to you. You might think Kozilek's a little bit better, but I just like Ulamog. And next up, we have our Time Warp Suite. This might seem kind of weird because Time Warps don't really go in sync with Nekusar the Mindrazer, but they actually do, considering we'll be drawing more cards and having our opponent draw more cards and doing a lot more damage. Finally, we have what's arguably the Mac Daddy of the deck, Omniscience, which essentially allows us to keep windmilling and windmilling and windmilling until our opponent is dead. The bad news is you won't be able to use abilities or cast Nekusar from your command zone for free, but usually that doesn't really matter, and it's nice because you don't need Nekusar to win the game. We have about 40 lands in the deck, and I'll go through them quickly. You'll get to see what they are. Polluted Delta for fetching. We have a bunch of blue-black dual lands. Dimmer Aqueduct. We do run a Bajuka Bog to use that with. Temple of Deceit. Here we have red-blue. Steam Vents. Shivan Wreath. I do run Scalding Tarn. You can run, I do run a Terramorphic Expanse, but you can run Evolving Wilds or other budget fetch lands like Panorama. Smoldering Marsh, Blood Crypt, these are the red-black lands. I don't run that many. Red and black is not the most important combination. Command Tower, for the deck at least, the most important combination for the deck. Command Tower, my Tri-Land, Crumbling Necropolis, Temple of the False God, because we do need some mana to power a lot of these big spells. Thespian Stage, which we can turn into Ancient Tomb, or the Temple of the False God. Academy Ruins allow us to recall artifacts that we really need. We have a lot of loot lands. We have Desolate Lighthouse. Phyrexia's Core is mainly used with Spine of Ishsaw, so we can recover it. Ghost Quarter, there's the Expanse I was telling you about. Another loot land. Bajuka Bog, that's what I was saying earlier. And our basics. We got islands, 7 islands, 4 swamps, and 2 mountains. So that's Nekusar the Mindrazer. Like I said, the deck is really flexible and up to you. There are several good options that you can use in addition with him that allow you to windmill, draw more cards, or make your opponent draw more cards. Again, this is the perfect deck if you love drawing cards and making your opponent draw cards and doing damage by drawing cards. So if any of those things appeal to you, this is the deck for you. Thank you again so much for watching. As always, everyone deserves to have the knowledge of Magic the Gathering, so if you haven't, please like and subscribe, as it will get this and all my other videos out there. Again, thank you so much for watching. My name is Rio Spectre, and I will see you all next time.